President Cyril Ramaphosa says that he hopes that the visit of AU Chair President Mackey Sall to Moscow and Kyiv will yield much-needed results. Speaking during the media briefing with his German counterpart Olaf Scholz, the president also emphasized South Africa's call for the cessation of hostilities between Russia and Ukraine. Scholz says the European Union member countries are also discussing an oil embargo on Russia.
The war in Ukraine has affected many countries around the world, and the African continent has not been spared. Leaders on the continent have raised concerns that the conflict will impact negatively on oil and food supplies. AU Chair Mackey Sall has been mandated by the continental body to visit Ukraine and Russia.
I had occasion to attend the meeting of the African Union Bureau, and at that meeting a discussion ensued on Africa's stance and response to the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine. It was there decided, and we participated in the discussion, that indeed the chair of the AU, President Mackey Sall, should travel to Russia, but we also said that he should travel to Ukraine. So it should not just be a one-sided type of visit. We believe that Africa does have a role to play because it has access to both leaders in both countries to foster the whole process of dialogue, to foster the whole process of negotiation. And of course, Africa, like any other country, will approach these discussions with a hope that they will have an impact. And that's the best that we can do, to embark on, if you like, a diplomatic process that will be led by President Macky Sall, as well as the chair of the Commission, Mr. Musa Mohammed. So we want them to go, and in a way they'll also be representing Africa and Africa's views and perspective on what we believe needs to happen. And as I said, this will all be underpinned by Africa's quest to see that there should be dialogue, because, as I said, that is the only way that even Africa sees this conflict coming to an end. We don't really see it coming to an end in any other way, as it has gone on for so long.
Germany says the European Union is discussing a thorny issue of an oil embargo on Russia.
We decided to impose a lot of sanctions against Russia to convince the Russian leadership that they should stop the war. And between those, we have decided that we will go out of the import of coal to Europe and also to Germany in autumn of this year. And this will work because there are a lot of suppliers all over the globe that are willing and ready to sell their coal to those countries that have got them so far from Russia. And obviously there are some, as South Africa, for instance, where we will do so, and this is something that is very manageable. The second is that we will go out of the use of the import of oil from Russia, and we are working to make this happen up to the end of this year, which is, in the case of Germany, a task where we have to work on, but it is feasible because most of the supply already is coming with ships from abroad, so it is just the supply that is now coming with a pipeline to just two but big refineries, and we are now working how we can make it feasible that they get the supply also via ship, and then we will have the chance to have other suppliers for oil imports to Germany. In the case of the whole European Union, we are discussing this question today because there are some countries which have technically more difficulties to solve this because of the infrastructure, how they get their oil, and this is something where we are working on. Just to make clear that we will go out of this. In the case of some countries, it will take a longer time, but in the end there is a big willingness to go this way. And the third is that we are discussing about how we can diversify our supply with the gas and getting away from the need to buy it from Russia. And this is also meaning and makes it necessary that we invest into infrastructures that gives us a chance to buy gas from LNG, liquid gas, which is the way many countries in the world are already doing. And making this happen is the basis for getting out of the need of importing the gas from Russia.
The current chair of the G7, Germany, will lead the discussion on the current situation in Ukraine at the summit next month. Sophie Mkwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, to give us a closer look at what this visit means and some analysis, we're now joined by Professor Malte Brosig from the Department of International Relations at the University of Witwatersrand here in Johannesburg. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Good evening.
All right, so beyond the normal rhetoric, which is, deepening political relations between our two countries, what do you see as the importance of this visit by Chancellor Scholz to South Africa?
Yeah, the last time a German chancellor was visiting South Africa was just before the COVID-19 pandemic hit the country in, I think it was February 2020, and before that there was, I think, a 10-year gap. So if Chancellor Scholz comes right now, I think this is kind of a return to a more normal pattern of regular visits. But of course there are a number of reasons that you can mention, and I think we do live in quite turbulent times internationally, and the war against Ukraine certainly also was one reason here. When we talk about economic relations, I think that becomes clear.
And I suppose this would explain why, when Angela Merkel became Chancellor, I think it was 2005, it took her 2 years before her first visit to sub-Saharan Africa. Olaf Scholz is here within 6 months. That puts us pretty high on the agenda. Is it geopolitical issues? What is so important about Africa in his equations?
Yeah, I think it's good he's coming, and he was there, and he was on a trip not only to South Africa but also to Senegal and Niger before. As you could see on his agenda, pretty high was the visit to and talks with Cecil. And the background story is, of course, on the one hand, Germany needs to diversify energy supplies away from Russia, so Russian oil and gas. And Africa generally can play a role here, especially with the export of liquefied gas, so LNG. So I think that was certainly one reason among others, but pretty high on the agenda.
All right, so you've talked about these energy cooperations. What else is in it for South Africa to strengthen this relationship with Germany?
I always believe that South African-German relations have a lot of potential, but so far we haven't really seen the full potential from both sides. Both countries are regional powers on their own continent, so they are quite influential in different regions, and they are both constitutional democracies and fairly stable countries. But very often, I think they come to different conclusions when it comes to the big topics globally, and the war against Ukraine is one of these topics. And I think more coordination and exchange of ideas and views is pretty important here.
How do you think that conversation went about Ukraine and Russia? South Africa choosing to be neutral as much as it can be, I suppose challenged by BRICS and so on and so forth. And Germany has been full on in terms of supporting Ukraine against Russia.
I guess so what I could see so far from today's meeting is that, of course, there was a very friendly engagement, and everyone was making their points about why Germany was taking this decision, with Ramaphosa explaining why South Africa was neutral. I don't expect any major changes. But of course, for Germany, as being a continental power in Europe, it's much closer to the conflict, right? So the consequences are much more direct for Germany than for South Africa. That certainly explains the very different reactions here. And of course, South Africa, also as a non-Western country, has repeatedly said that, you know, it feels somehow not comfortable with supporting a Western sanctions here. But I think this is a difficult framing somehow. I mean, this time the Cold War is certainly over and it's not coming back. Also not with a hyper-aggressive Russia here, but the framing of that South Africa is using, I think, is somehow problematic because we have clearly seen one-sided violence and it shouldn't be too difficult to condemn that.
How do you see all of this unfolding going forward? Because one gets a sense that the political dynamics have shifted quite a bit. You know, before we had America trying to persuade Africa, we're your best friend, China came in, and in recent years we saw more and more activity from Russia, France, and so on and so forth. And I just wonder, this conflict really has polarized even African countries about what to do and who to support. Germany, I suppose, taking as diplomatic a stance as it can, but does it shift things at all, especially with our relationship with Russia, with China, with the US, and superpowers like Germany?
Yes, I mean, we do live in times that are definitely more complex, and we do also live in times where I think the classical bloc building is certainly over, right? Again, even the war against Ukraine is not, it doesn't mark a return to the Cold War. And the reason is that we, and you mentioned it, there are much more powers these days than just East and West, for example, right? So, and this situation we have to deal with in one way or the other, so that we do live in a multipolar world here. And my prediction for the future would be even that, you know, we have more tensions, and therefore I think keeping the diplomatic channels open among the greater powers, the larger powers, is absolutely crucially important to prevent a situation that we've seen right now, so that we do not see aggressive invasion of other countries.
I suppose this energy crisis also presents an opportunity for Africa going forward, because these European powers have to wean themselves off Russia somehow.
That is true, and I think the high energy prices, you know, certain countries do profit from it. Obviously, those countries who can export oil and gas would see tremendous net benefits right now. But for the majority of countries worldwide, high oil and energy prices are a real challenge, and this has to be taken very seriously. On the other hand, of course, we also live in the time of a climate crisis, and it's just smart, generally independent of the war, to try to move away from fossil fuels, or at least to, you know, invest much more in green energies, green hydrogen. There is a large industrial market for that, actually, and I think developing countries, emerging countries like South Africa and others would have a chance to also, you know, conquer this market to some extent.
I know that you're not in the German Chancellor's office, but I just wonder about the countries he chose to visit. Senegal maybe makes sense, a powerhouse in West Africa. Niger, and then coming to South Africa. Maybe you can explain that to me. And also, do you think he missed an opportunity to go to Namibia, where last year they had to apologize, of course, about what happened in the colonial era?
It's, you know, Africa has a number of countries, so you always have to be extremely selective about where you go. But I think the priorities of Germany that you could see is really that, okay, there's a preference for constitutional democracies and fairly stable countries, and the emphasis is much more on long-term good relations. And with other countries that, you know, are not so democratic, the relationships are a little bit cooler. And I think that explains that South Africa is still seen. I know that domestically in South Africa, the view might be different as a stable country, as an anchor of democracy in the region. And of course, it's an important country when it comes to engaging the African continent in general here. And I guess that will not be the last visit of the Chancellor to Africa. And then I would assume we would see a slightly different selection of countries.
Namibia, do you think he could have gone there?
When this is very hard to say, and I think it depends if you have a final deal or agreement with the different Namibian parties. And I think then it would be time for the Chancellor to be there. But before that, I guess that will be difficult.
All right, but all in all, it sounds like this visit to South Africa, the deals that have been signed, Sasol, jet fuel, energy deals, this sounds all very positive in terms of the next chapters between the South Africa-Germany relationship.
I think this would, and energy is, of course, everyone knows this in South Africa with the Eskom crisis. Energy is absolutely essential for every economy to do well here. And I know that the German industry, Germany is a very heavily industrialized country, and the main priority is to have access to energy sources. And there's a quite large market for green hydrogen. So, whoever is able to supply that would, I think, have a very stable and long-term and good relationship with Germany. So I would see this as the real potential.
All right, Prof, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and your insights greatly appreciated. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
Good night. All right, so that was Professor Malte Brosig from the Department of International Relations at the University of the Witwatersrand here in Johannesburg, speaking to us about the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's visit to South Africa. And today was day one, and we see what might come out in the next day or so. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, more on the globe. And don't forget, a little bit later on, Kenya and Zimbabwe. They're not going to be part of the next round of African Championship qualifiers. Find out why.